So that's complexity. And that's a better way of conceptualizing what the terror management guys are after with regards to the fear of death. You know, so partly I don't think they're very imaginative. There's many worse things than death to be terrified of. Like insanity is probably one. You know, pain, that's a bad one. Long-term pain, that's a bad one. Well, then there's long-term pointless pain. You know, then there's your long-term pointless pain and that of your family. Like there's horrors that exceed death by orders of magnitude. So to make that the fundamental fear, I think that's an error. You know, it's like, are people more afraid of dying or having their children die? You know, that's a perfectly reasonable question. So I read Becker. Really read him. Like, I like Becker's book. It's brilliant, but he makes a bunch of mistakes. For one of the things he does, for example, is right in the intro he says, it's a book that's trying to bring about the psychoanalytic closure of the study of religion. So it's neo-Freudian, smartly neo-Freudian. And he wants to explain religion pretty much completely within the psychoanalytic framework. He does a great job. But in the intro he says, well, you might wonder why in a book that's devoted to the last word in psychoanalytic thinking about religion, I never mention Jung. So then he says a bunch of things about Jung. One of them is, I could never understand a single thing he was talking about when he wrote all his works on alchemy. It's like, oh well, that's a problem, because that's where all the information that your book lacks is. All of it. You missed it. It's like, yeah, you're thinking about the hero myth, for example, as a delusion. And, you know, as a hero project, and as something that's only there to stave off the fear of death. It's like, well, you got a good way into the depths, and way farther than most people get, but you missed the next 300 stories. So, and that's too bad. So, you know, and it's funny because I've also read the social psychology, a fair bit of it, that is associated with terror management. And most of the problem with it is it hasn't moved Becker 1 inch. It's like, yeah, that's what Becker said, so we're proving it. Well, no, not really, because the demonstrations are amenable to multiple interpretations. But Becker, he covered it. I mean, it's a brilliant book, but it's wrong.
So, right. So on that note, is this argument is wrong in what way? For people that may not have read Becker, they're not fully aware of the terror management theory.
Well, because he thinks of everything that we do to contend with mortality as a ruse, you know, and I don't think that's right. Because I don't think that it's necessary to be terrified of death. Now, it's not easy not to be, but, you know, it's fate that, as far as Becker's concerned, is that that's what you're going to be terrified of. It's like, well, I don't think that that's right. I think that people don't have to be terrified of death. It's not an easy state to achieve. It's not like I want to die, although I can certainly imagine things that are worse than that, like no problem. So I think, and this is something Solzhenitsyn laid out in the Gulag Archipelago too, I think there are ways of living that are worse than death. That's why people commit suicide. That's their decision. So obviously hell is worse than death, you know, given how I described it earlier. So it isn't death that's the problem, it's complexity that's the problem, is that things are beyond us. And because of that, they always exceed what our models tell us they're going to do, or they always transform themselves in some ungainly way so that we don't get what we want. So then the question is, well, how do you best deal with complexity? And the reason I think truth is so useful is because generally it reduces complexity, right? I mean, one of the things that's really useful about trying to say things that you believe to be true is you don't have to remember what you said. It's like, well, what did I say? Well, I don't know, but I was trying to explain things properly. Then you don't have to tear through all your rationalizations and think about what you have to keep track of. Like deceptions, they grow, you know, they're like hydras. So, well, don't do that, okay? Truth, simpler. That's one big advantage. You know, and people can say, well, truth isn't always the answer. Well, there are sometimes you get into a situation that's so awful, you've made so many mistakes that not only would it be very difficult for truth to rescue you? You've already warped your character to such a degree that you couldn't even use it. Well, you've had it. You know, you're off the radar at that point, and nothing short of a miracle would save you.